Alright, so what we're going to talk about right now is mixers. Now mixers, the main thing you got to worry about is that there are three basic functions to a mixer. Number one, you got your input. That's your sound coming into the mixer. Could be from a microphone, could be from a keyboard, could be from a guitar. Basically, you got sound, it's coming in. Now, number two, you've got the control of the sound that's coming in. So you want to control things like the volume of the sound as it comes into the mixer. You want to control things like the volume that you're sending out to something like a reverb unit or a compressor. Number three, final stage, the output. You want to send it to some monitors on stage, speakers, headphones, anything like that.
These are the absolute basic controls every mixer should have. A power on-off switch. Some may be as simple as unplugging or plugging in the power cord.
Every mixer has a variety of different input sources. You have your XLR inputs, your 1/4-inch TRS inputs, and your RCA inputs. Every mixer also has multiple channels with their own independent controls of the sound in channel strips.
The mic line, or gain, also known as trim, controls the level of the incoming sound. You can also adjust whether it would be instrument or line.
Also, continuing down the channel strip, you find EQ controls. On this mixer, there are only two. One for high and one for low. This is used to either turn up or turn down the high and low frequencies.
Most mixers will have either a slider or a knob. Here we see they have knobs. This will control the volume, and the panning is actually set on this mixer. By pressing this button, it hard pans channels 1 and 2.
So after you have established the sound that you want on each channel, you have your main volume level here, also a knob, but it can be a fader or slider on other mixers. And there's also an independent control of the volume of the headphone output.
Next to that, you have a visual level meter, either a VU or LED, as we see here with a row of lights.
So the output on this particular mixer, we have 1/4-inch outputs here. There's also some RCA outputs here. Sometimes you'll find XLR outputs. This mixer does not have that, but many do.
Other extras you'll find are the phantom power, which some microphones require. That will send power for the microphone. And you have a headphone jack here for an output and a headphone level here with this pot.
So here you can see we have a much larger mixer with a few more channels on it. As well, there are several more controls that we'd like to talk about. The first control going down the channel strip is the auxiliary sends. So there's aux send 1 and aux send 2. They come out the mixer here, and this would be useful for, say, sending your signal out to an external processor, say a reverb unit, or in a live performance situation, you would be using this to send the signal out to the monitors for the performers on stage. And there's aux returns here. You can bring the signal back in either mono or stereo. So left and right, 1 and 2, or just mono 1 and 2.
Further down the channel strip, there is a 3-band EQ. We have a high, a mid, and a low. And this gives you EQ control over each individual channel.
Next down the channel strip, we have the pan pot instead of that hard pan button of the first mixer, so you can turn the knob and discreetly control how much left or right channel you are sending to.
And below that, we have the mute button. The mute button allows you to cancel out any individual channel that you wish. And below that is a solo button, which does the opposite. It cancels out every channel except for the ones that have the button pressed.
One other thing to mention on this mixer is that the switch for the phantom power is now located along the back near the power switch.
Auxiliary. Why would you use it? You take your signal, you send it to an effects unit like a compressor, a delay, or a reverb, and you bring it back on the return.
So we were talking about the difference between the two mixers with the panning and how here we have a knob versus on the smaller mixer where we just had a button that selected hard left and hard right on the two channels. So what this knob allows you to do is control the amount of sound that's going into either the left or the right channel. So you can have it right in the center and it's evenly mixed, and the more you move it towards the right, the more you go to the right until you're all the way right. Same thing with left. We also are talking about the mute button. Why would you use a mute button? Well, basically, it's because you don't want to hear the sound on that channel at that moment. Maybe there's a problem with it. Maybe you just don't need it, and you want to make sure that you don't have any unnecessary sounds in your mix. And then the solo button, again, what that does is solos that track, so that's all that you hear. That can be very useful if you are troubleshooting or wanting to focus in on a specific sound.
Mackie, did you clean your room? Mackie? Mackie?
So as you can see, we've once again upgraded in the size of our mixer. We now have a 16-channel mixer, and with the larger size, there are a few new features that we'd like to talk about. Starting up at the top, going down the channel strips, we notice first off that there are now individual toggles for the phantom power on each channel. Underneath that is a toggle for a high-pass filter. Then, of course, there's your gain trim knob. And moving down a little further, we enter the EQ section. We now have a 4-band EQ. We have the high, high-mid, low-mid, and low. And a nice feature on this mixer is that with the two mids, you now have the ability to change the center frequency.
Below the EQ, the auxiliary section has now been expanded to 6 sends on each channel, followed by the pan, a mute button, and we've now moved up to having a fader on each channel with its own independent LED meters. There's also a sub-assignment for a subgroup, and we have 4 subgroups over here to the right. This is great for doing multi-channel work or doing a submix. Above that, we also have the returns for the auxiliary channels.
Moving up again, once again we see our master level meters here, right underneath the headphone jack. And a new feature on this is the talkback microphone, which is built in over here. And so you can just push the talkback button and you can speak to somebody if you are set up in a control room or any sort of other room away from the people who are recording, or perhaps you're doing live sound and you want to communicate with the people on stage. There's also a place to plug in a lamp, which can be very handy in dark situations. And there's quite a few more features on this mixer, but we just don't have time to get into them right now. So here we have an example of a much larger mixer. This is a 32-channel board. So let's discuss some of the new things that we find on this massive board in addition to the extra channels. So picking a random channel strip here. We see at the top, once again, there's a phantom power switch, another switch for going from mic to line input. New here is the polarity switch, where you can reverse the polarity on the signal coming in. And then, of course, you have your gain trim and the same complement of EQ knobs here. New to the EQ section is a high-pass filter switch. So you can kick in a high-pass filter or take it out. Moving along down, we get to the auxiliary sends. We have 10 of them now. The first 8 are grouped in 4s, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a pre-post switch. 5, 6, 7, 8, another pre-post switch. 9 and 10 are now a stereo send. So you have 2 knobs for that, one to adjust the signal level and another one to adjust the pan, and again, a pre-post switch.
The interesting thing about the pre-post switch is by kicking that in, what you're doing is you're sending your signal in that channel. What it does is it goes to the output at full volume. By hitting post fader, what you're doing is you're allowing that signal to be affected by the fader. Each channel also has an LED meter, and the most important thing on this board, I would say, is the new group channels. And you'll see that they're grouped in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8. And what this does is by kicking in 1 and 2, it allows these two channels to go to subgroups 1 and 2. By panning left to the odd and panning right to the even in the other channel, you're now sending the signal to groups 1 and 2 over here. And you can then control the output here as well. This is fantastic for doing submixes and also doing multi-channel outputs. The other thing that's key with this is each channel also has 4 mute buttons. And what that does is you can select a certain mute group, say mute 1 for these 3 channels, and what that does is that gives you control to knock out 3 channels at the same time, all by the flick of a switch here. You have buttons for mute 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that gives you a lot of control to mute out a group of channels at the same time.
So again, looking up from these mute buttons, we find once again another LED level meter strip, which you find on pretty much every mixer. There's an input here for a talkback microphone, some controls for that, and well, there's a whole host of other options on this board, but that's really the important things that we would like to cover right now.
So there you have it. Your mixer consists of basically 3 components. You've got your input, bringing the sound in from 2 or more sources. You got your sound control. That's where you're going to add some effects, do some EQ, manage the sound. And you've got your output. That's where you're summing. You're taking 2 or more tracks and basically breaking them down into a stereo, mono, or even multi-channel mix. Some mixers just have more components than others.